Hi, Farmer Carey. I see we're out at the place where we took a tour last week, and the lettuce is growing really good.
How do we know how far apart to plant our plant starts?
Well,
And does it matter?
oh yes, it does. Remember, we unveiled this in our tour of the garden at spring break. Well, now you can see how well these lettuces are growing, and it really does matter how close or how far apart you plant your starts, because every plant is different and it needs different amount of room to grow, to be happy. And once you know what kind of plant you have and you know what its kind of personality is, then you'll know how far apart to plant it. So for example, these lettuce, you can see we planted 4 to a row, and they're about 8 inches or so apart. These are a little farther apart. These are a little closer. It was a bit random. Lettuce can be planted a little closer together. Bok choy, the kind of baby bok choy we give you, can be even planted closer than lettuce. And we're going to show you some potato holes and some kale. They need more room because they're bigger plants and they're in the ground longer. These little guys, they grow for maybe a month, and you chop them off and eat them. Now, you see these peas? Peas like to be closer together. They don't need a lot of space, so we planted these about 1.5 inches apart. Look at them. And here you can see we have 2 rows of kale, and they're all about 16 inches apart. See? And they're growing beautifully. So each one of these is going to grow up, and then their leaves might touch each other, but they won't be crowding each other. So here's an example of the spacing for our spring kale. And remember that kale that we were looking at when we talked about bolting kale? Here it is. It's really bolted, and look at all the flowers it's making. That's going to have a lot of good seeds. So here you see a kale bed, and look, we planted everything about 15 to 18 inches apart. See that? And see how it's growing out and they're kind of snuggling up against each other, but they all have enough room and they're not too crowded. So Mr. Levasseur, here we are with our sour sorrel, and you can see we planted these almost 2 feet apart, and look, we have a lot of extra space in here. So do you think that we could have planted these a little closer?
I do.
Yeah, these are maybe a little farther apart. So you can say they get pretty big, but we have all this extra space. So if I were going to plant this bed over again, I might plant them a little closer. That's why I told all of you that are getting sour sorrel to plant them about 12 inches apart. Mr. Levasseur, we're planting potatoes here today, and we're actually going to plant them in holes. Before we planted some in a trench, and we showed you that in another video. But here we're going to plant them in holes because there's different ways to do things. Now, we want to plant them 16 inches apart. We've got our ruler. Here's a foot. Okay, and there's another 4 inches right to there, and that's our 16 inches. Now, I don't want to go fiddling with this ruler all the time, so I happen to have a stick that's 16 inches wide, so I can measure how far apart everything goes. And now we measured this bed, and we know that we can take 44 more potatoes. So here's an example of spacing that's wider because potatoes need space to grow. They'll get nice big green leaves, and underneath they're growing all those potatoes. Oh, Mr. Levasseur, look, Joe is planting up the bok choy. Look how nicely she's spaced it. How far apart are they, Joe?
6 inches approximately.
Wow, look how nice that spacing is. These are little babies. They look great, Joe. Thank you so much for planting those.
You're welcome.
Oh, Lori, thank you so much for spacing those lettuce. Yeah, see, look, Mr. Levasseur, she's got that stick. And see how she can measure with the stick? There we go. Now those are perfect spacing to be really, really close enough, but not too close. And then we're going to plant all these lettuce here in the hoop house. Thank you, Lori.
How long will it take them to grow into adult lettuce?
Well, we're gonna, these starts are about 3 weeks old. So I would say, especially in the hoop house where it's nice and warm, about 3 weeks we should have lettuce. These are special lettuce called one cut, easy cuts, and we'll cut them off. It'll be like having salad mix.
Now, after she puts them in the hole, what does she do with the dirt around them?
Well, she's going to plant them. Lori, could you show Mr. Lavasser how you plant that plant? See, look, she just tucks it right in there. What we did in this case is we made a trench. We add a little bit of fertilizer and worm castings, and so that trench is all nice and soft. And you just stick the little start in the trench at the right spacing, which we did with that stick, and then boom. Oh, Lori, that looks so great. Thank you. See how easy it is? And now you can see Mr. Lavasser, see this nice grid? See how many lettuce that we can fit in here? We've got 4 rows that are about 6, 7, 8 inches apart, and they're about 6 or 7 inches. The rows are that far apart, and then the lettuce are that far apart, so they're almost equidistant. So now we're in our little hoop house, and you can see we have planted so many lettuce down this row, and we planted it kind of close. But I have a little trick. Right here, you can see this is planted so close, it's all growing together. See that right there? See how that's growing together? But what we can do now is we're going to thin it. So here we go. I'm all ready to thin. I have here is a lettuce, and here's another lettuce right next to it. It's not quite as big as it could be, but I'm going to thin it right here. Yum. Put it in the bag because it's going to go to the cafeteria or to Good Cheer, and here we go again. Here's another one. Every other one I'm going to thin. And then these can grow really big. Now here we go. Here's 2 more. I think I'm going to thin one right here. So you see how if you plant your veggies too close, that you can thin them, and then you will have the other ones grow nice and big. So that's how you can do it. There we go. Yum veggies. Look at that. See how nice that is? So, Mr. Lavasser, did that answer your question about how far apart you plant plants and why?
You sure did, Farmer Carey. I learned so much today. Thank you.
Great. Well, have fun planting your starts.
I will, and I'm sure all the students will too.
And eating them when they're grown.
Yum.